Hello, Pedro. I'm Maria Alejandra Chumbe, and this is Maria Gracia Echevarria. And we are going to talk to you about chapters 13, 14, and 15 of the subject guide of Principles of Accounting. And we hope that you like this version better. And we think that this audio is better than the first one that we did. So, chapter 13 talks about an introduction to management accounting. And it basically says that management accounting is the branch of accounting that provides information for users that are internal to the business, such as directors, managers, employees, etc. And it is used to help managers plan, control, and coordinate their business activities. Then it talks about planning and coordination, and it says that accounting will help provide information about the resources which are currently available to the firm. And this is really useful when deciding on strategic objectives that are consistent with achieving the overall goal of the firm, that is usually a bit of a long-term goal. And once the main objective of the business is established, the company has to decide the budget that it requires to make some strategic decisions, and then to check the coordination between the departments of the firm, and finally to verify that there is goal congruence between the objectives. And finally, it talks about control, communication, and motivation. And it says that control is closely linked to planning, as its purpose is to ensure that the business is proceeding according to plan. Corrective actions can be taken if the directors see that there are mistakes being made. Managers must check that the achievements of the short-term plans are building towards the achievement of a strategic goal. And finally, the way in which planning and control activities are conducted can help motivate the staff. And this is a very important thing for the business. And in the part 13.4, they talk about information for decision making. And they say that an important consideration in decision making is the quality of the information that the firm gets, and its quality is reflected on the accuracy and its reliability. And the answer to the question on what information is required and how it is used, it will vary according to the decision that needs to be made in the firm according to the time period. ¿Puedes borrar eso?
Sí. Okay, so now a small recap on chapter 14. Chapter 14 talks about costs, and the first part is about understanding the types of costs there are. So as we know, there are two types of costs: fixed costs and variable costs. Fixed costs do not vary with the level of output production. For example, rents that stay the same, or salaries. And variable costs, on the other hand, change in proportion to changes in the level of production. There are also another type which is semi-variable costs, which has features of both fixed and variable costs. So here we can see a small recap of the types of costs that there are. In the first case, we see a fixed cost. Then we can see a step cost, which is a fixed cost that from one period to another increases, for example, and then maintains the same level for another period of time, such as rent in some cases. Then variable cost, which varies with the same proportion as production. Variable costs with quantity discount, we can see how the variable cost increases at a faster rate and then increases still, but at a smaller rate. Semi-variable costs that have features of both. It begins like at a fixed cost and then increases. And fixed cost plus an upturn. Then there are also direct and indirect costs. Direct costs can be identified with individual cost units, and a cost unit is usually a single unit of the production of a good or service that is sold, but it can also be an entire division of a business. It's a cost that is directly attributed to a product or service. And then indirect costs, also called overheads, are costs that are not directly attributable to a good or service. Direct costs, for example, it's labor. or direct materials, and indirect costs include, for example, electricity. Okay, then there are two types of costing. The first type is marginal costing. Marginal costing has the characteristic that it only includes direct costs in the evaluation of the inventory. In this example, we can see three products, A1, A2, and B, and the total cost is composed of the labor, as we can see, and on the materials, having a total of 550, for example, for A1. But the indirect costs, which are the fixed costs of rent and the salary of purchase ledger clerks, are not included because they are indirect. The second type of costing is full costing, which is the one we normally use, and it's also called total absorption costing, in which full costs equal direct plus indirect costs. The indirect costs are absorbed into the individual unit costs, and this is accurate when overheads constitute a big portion of the total cost, because in this case you are taking into consideration overheads. And the weakness, however, is that it involves subjectivity, because in order for you to absorb the indirect cost into each individual cost unit, you need a basis, which is determined by the company, and that can involve some subjectivity. So here's a little summary of both. Marginal costing is less subjective and has a lower inventory valuation because you don't take into consideration indirect costs. And the full costing is more subjective, it's a higher valuation of inventory, but it's a requirement in the UK because it's common that the indirect costs do compose of an important amount of the inventory, and this to provide different gross profits. Sí, te ves.
Sí.
Te lo presento.
Now, finally, we're going to talk about chapter 15 of the subject guide, which basically talks about the cost volume profit analysis, or CVP analysis, and it is used to determine the level of output to achieve any level of target profit that the business intends to achieve. But it's based on some assumptions, some of which are a bit, unrealistic, but we're going to talk about it a few moments later. These assumptions are that the costs and revenue patterns are known with certainty, that costs are either fixed or variable, that costs and revenues are linear over the range of output considered, and fixed costs, variable costs, and prices are constant. Volume is the only factor affecting costs. There is one single product and all output is sold. As you can see in the graph, the break-even point is the level of output at which profits are zero. And this level of output is represented by point A, which is intersection between the lines of the total revenue and total cost. And besides, the contribution is the price minus the variable costs, which is another important term for this type of analysis.
Okay, so Maria Alejandra said it was important because the contribution is used to calculate the break-even point. The break-even quantity formula is the total fixed costs divided by the contribution per unit. So here we have an example. Price is 100, fixed costs is 16,000. Variable costs are 60 per bicycle. And the contribution is therefore price minus variable costs. So contribution is price 100 minus 60, so it's 40. So the break-even quantity would be 16,000 divided by 40, and it's in quantity, so the answer is 400 bicycles. So by selling 400 bicycles, the company will get to this point where it doesn't make any profits and where its total revenue equals its total costs. However, the break-even point formula can also be calculated when you want to know how much to sell to earn a target profit. So in this case, the only difference would be to add to the numerator the target profit you want, and the rest stays the same. So for example here, I would add the target profit that I want, which is 20,000. And the answer is 900. So to earn 20,000 as profit, I need to sell 900 bicycles. This is simple because if I cover this target profit, then I make 0 profit. So yes, it's easy.
Now we're going to talk about a bit the margin of safety. There are two concepts involved here. The first one is the margin of safety, just as that, which is the difference between the expected sales revenue or output level and the break-even sales revenue or output level, respectively. And then the margin of safety ratio expresses a concern of managers regarding how much can their expected sales revenue or output fall before business starts to make a loss. But that, represented mathematically, equals the budgeted sales minus the break-even sales or revenues over the budgeted sales. Obviously in percentage, so it's multiplied by 100. And now I'm going to talk about the limitations of this type of analysis that I mentioned before. The first one is that obviously it's based on unrealistic assumptions, and it is only available for a certain period of time, so you have to do it frequently. And finally, it is very limited to particular range of levels of output, which is also a little bit unrealistic. For example, if you want to sell 1,000 but you only have the capacity to sell 100, it is unrealistic and it's not very useful for the position of the firm.
Yeah, so it can, like, the formula can tell you what amount you have to sell, but maybe it's not feasible.
Yeah.
There are external factors that won't let you reach that. Also, at the end of the chapter, it made a distinction between two types of costs. Relevant costs, which are the ones that will be affected or changed by a decision under consideration, and they are future incremental cash flows, and they have the correct characteristics that they will arise in the future, are incremental, or they will change when a decision is made, and they are cash flows. For example, a cost that would not be relevant would be a marketing study done before a project, because even though the project is done or not done, you already did this marketing cost. And then opportunity costs, which is, as we all know, the value of the next best opportunity forgone. So if you have two projects and you decide to do one, then the opportunity cost will be the second project. And finally, there are some limiting factors mentioned at the end of the chapter, which are that businesses have limited resources at their disposal. Firms cannot sell unlimited quantities of output without reducing price. And the second limitation is that there may be multiple limiting factors, and when firms face more than one limiting factor, they should take into account the relevant costs to sort it out. So, in other words, many times there's more than one problem or limitation, and they have to take into consideration what costs will be affected when they make a decision in order to figure out what's the best path to take.
Thanks, Pedro. We hope to see you sometime.
Bye.
Bye.